Today I'll be looking at sports ethic guidelines within different media outlets' ethics codes. Ethic codes are essential to any newsroom and every department within that newsroom. Sports journalism is no exception. With ethical standards of sports journalism taking heat from researchers, writers, and other journalists, I decided to look at specific ethical guidelines that some major outlets have outlined for sports journalists. We'll look at ethics codes from the Canadian Press, CBC, the Chronicle Herald, the BBC, and the New York Times. But first we'll look at ethics codes written specifically for sports journalists, the Associated Press Sports Editors Ethical Guidelines. The guidelines are divided into 7 parts. Section 1 covers freebies and states that newspapers pay its staffers way for travel, accommodations, food, and drink. If a reporter travels directly with a team, then the newspaper must insist on either paying the bill or paying the estimated flight cost. Section 2 covers conflicts of interest. This section has 3 rules. No serving as official scorer at games. This means journalists cannot be responsible for recording game statistics. They should not rate for a team or a sport organization's publication. This could compromise objectivity. And finally, a reporter's loyalty is to his or her media outlet. Section 3 jumps back to freebies, insisting that all gifts a reporter receives from organizations or promoters should either be donated or returned. Section 4 covers free tickets. The only free tickets this journalist should accept are his or her press pass for a particular game or event. Section 5 urges newspapers to carefully consider the implications of voting for all sports awards and all-star teams, and deciding if such voting creates a conflict of interest. Section 6 is a reminder that sports journalists must follow the ethical guidelines assigned to all journalists in their particular media organization. Finally, Section 7 states that assignments should be made on merit without regard for race or gender. For example, just because there is a female sports reporter in the department does not mean that she should be strictly covering women's sports. Surprisingly, the code mentions nothing of remaining impartial, which is a major issue when discussing ethics in sports journalism. The Canadian Press's ethics code can be found online. Its code is 1,186 words in length, but not one of those words is related directly to sports journalism. It does talk about impartiality to quite an extent, but its section on freebies is very unspecific. It only states that their policy is to pay their way and that their staff should not accept anything that might compromise their integrity or credibility. So does this include press box passes and free meals? CBC's journalist standards and practices covers a large variety of ethical guidelines for different beats, including crime, politics, and war. But of those 24 sections, not one is dedicated to sports. Even under live reporting, something CBC does practically every Saturday on Hockey Night in Canada, nothing is mentioned specifically about sports. The Chronicle Herald's ethics code is 19 pages long, 17 of which are dedicated to actual codes and guidelines. None of those pages contain specific guidelines for sports reporters or any other beat reporter for that matter. The BBC's ethical guidelines is one of the most detailed and well-organized codes we viewed. The search tool allows people to find codes quickly. A search of the ethical guidelines revealed that there is no section on sports, leaving sports as one of the only topics uncovered in this massive code. Sports ethics finally finds a home in the New York Times code, under rules for specialized departments. The sports section has 3 rules, one being no member of the sports staff may be allowed to gamble on sporting events, except for occasional recreational wagering in a legal setting. Rule 2 explains that except for properly issued press passes for event coverage, members of sports staff may not accept tickets, travel expenses, meals, gifts, or any other benefits from teams or promoters. But at their discretion, sports editors or management may permit journalists to accept light refreshments that are commonly offered to journalists while they're viewing in the press box. Sports reporters assigned to cover games may not serve as scorers, is the 3rd rule. Only one of the 5 ethics codes we looked at made specific guidelines for sports journalists. But that's not to say these guidelines we looked at were poor. All the codes featured included sections on accuracy, honesty, impartiality, and plagiarism. It's important for sports journalism to follow all the codes outlined in their media outlets' ethics code. Of course, codes do not guarantee ethical behavior. How often ethics are discussed and embraced within a newsroom is equally, if not more important, than the actual codes themselves. How often editors and managers raise the issue of ethics is a concern. A survey in 2005 produced by Marie Harden found that over 60% of the 285 sports editors who participated in her survey said ethical discussions took place only occasionally or rarely. This suggests that not only could sports ethic codes use some work, but so could their prominence in newsrooms.